Hey guys, welcome back to World of Tanks. My name is Bruce and today I want to offer you a little guide on ammunition and penetration mechanics in World of Tanks. Let's go! In World of Tanks you have different kinds of ammunition. There is AP Armor Piercing, there is APCR Armor Piercing Composite Ridgid. Then there is Heat, High Explosive Anti-Tank, and there is HE, High Explosive. Some tanks also have a variant of this, which is HESH, High Explosive Squash Head. In this video I will focus on AP, APCR and Heat and tell you everything you need to know about their characteristics so that you understand why you sometimes cannot penetrate your opponent and why sometimes you can. So let's see what we have. Usually the first type of ammunition is AP or APCR. The second type of ammunition is usually APCR or Heat. The first standard ammunition, which is right here, in this case APCR, usually loses only a bit of penetration over distance because normally what a tank has is AP as the standard ammunition. The second premium ammunition is usually APCR and this loses more penetration over the distance. Now in this case, as you can see, the Leopard PTA does have APCR as its premium ammunition and then also APCR as its as a standard ammunition and then also as its premium ammunition. And so the first shell will lose less penetration value over the distance compared to the second one. Now this value differs from tank to tank. So for example, let me give you an extreme example. If you take the GSOR 1008, you can see it has AP as the first ammunition and it loses only a bit of penetration value over distance. However, its secondary shell is APCR and it loses 101 millimeters of penetration over distance. So an extreme value, and I simply want to show you that this differs from tank to tank. By the way, in game you can see the type of ammunition that your opponent used and whether it was standard or premium ammunition. This is super important, so you have to activate the respective setting. So you click on settings, you select battle notifications, then you click on log. And then where it says detailed damage, you have to select display always. Not only can you see whether you block damage or whether you receive damage, you will also see whether it was standard ammunition indicated in gray. And then you can see the type of the shell. But you can also see whether it was premium ammunition. In this case, it would be orange. So this is super important for your situational awareness in an engagement. But first of all, let's talk about some general knowledge concerning penetration mechanics and thereafter we will dive into the characteristics of each shell type. Meanwhile, you can enjoy the gameplay with the Centurion 7.1 in the background. So let's start with some general stuff. Penetration value must exceed the armor value. This is the baseline. Now keep in mind that the penetration value can be plus minus 25%. This is what Wargaming calls RNG. A shell's penetration value over a certain distance needs to exceed the effective armor value and enter the structure of the tank to cause damage. The effective armor is as shown in this formula. H being the armor thickness, A being the corner between the normal, not the tangent, the normal. So the normal of the armor and the shell entrance angle. Here is where the first effect comes into place. Shell normalization. Shells are shaped so that they reduce the penetration angle towards the normal, once again the opposite of the tangent of the armor. This is called normalization. This effect reduces the effective armor the shell has to penetrate. Now, we need to talk about two rules which complicate all this so far learned penetration mechanic. First of all, the so-called 2 caliber rule. If your caliber is equal to or exceeds twice the number of the armor, the normalization value is greatly increased. Now, the second rule, the so-called 3 caliber rule, which, and this is important, only applies for AP and APCR and more to this more of this later on in the game. If your caliber is more than twice the number of the nominal armor, not the effective armor, but the nominal armor, there will not be a ricochet and you will always penetrate. Now, when an AP or APCR shell hits a screen, a regular penetration calculation is executed for the screen, and thereafter the remaining penetration value is used for another regular penetration calculation for the remaining armor. On the other hand, when a heat shell penetrates a screen, it loses penetration value for every 10 centimeter thereafter before it hits the regular armor. Therefore, chances are that it cannot pen the regular armor. If a shell penetrates a screen but doesn't hit the main armor, you will hear critical hit. And if a shell penetrates a screen but doesn't penetrate the armor, the main armor, you will hear we didn't penetrate their armor. So this is important to notice. So far, so good. Let's now talk about the different characteristics of the different shell types. We will start off with AP. AP can go through objects. The penetration value of AP reduces only slightly over distance. It has mediocre velocity. It has mediocre penetration. Its normalization value is 5 degrees. It ricochets at an angle of 70 degrees or more, and it can overmatch the opponent. APCR is pretty equal compared to AP. APCR can also go through objects. It loses a lot of penetration value over distance. It has typically the highest shell velocity. Its normalization value is only 2 degrees. It also ricochets at an angle of 70 degrees or more, and it can overmatch the opponent. On the other hand, heat shells are pretty different compared to AP and APCR. Heat shells cannot go through objects. Their penetration value does not reduce over distance. They have normalization. Heat ricochets at an angle of 85 degrees or more, and it cannot overmatch the opponent. And last but not least, let's talk about HE. HE deals splash damage. It can go through objects. Yes, HE can after the rework in 2023. Heat shells, once again, cannot. HE has the lowest velocity. It does not lose penetration over distance. It has no normalization. It does not ricochet. It cannot overmatch the opponent. However, it can penetrate screens and cause damage to the main armor. Of course, only if the penetration value is sufficient, which is most of the case, not the case. So, what does it all mean and why do you need to know those characteristics? Let's find out with the awesome tanks.gg webpage. So let's first of all take the KPZ50T and compare it to the Leopard 1. Now the Leopard 1 has a standard penetration value on its regular ammunition, which is APCR of 278. And as you can see, you will not be able to penetrate the upper hull, nor will you be able to penetrate most of the turret armor. And that is simply because the armor, the effective armor of the turret is too thick, indicated in red, so you will bounce if you take a shot onto the turret. Now you will ricochet on the upper hull because the angle is beyond 70 degrees, meaning that your APCR shell will ricochet. And there's nothing you can do because even if you select the premium APCR shell, you will at least bounce on the upper hull, but of course your penetration value will now be sufficient to penetrate at least some portions of the turret, not at the side, but here next to the gun, more to the left of the turret of the KPZ50T. Now let's take a look at the KPZ and compare it to the Centurion Action X. And as you can see, there's basically nothing that changes because the Centurion Action X has also APCR and a relatively comparable penetration value compared to the Leopard 1. Now, if you select Heat, you can see that basically nothing changes. You will be able to penetrate some portion of the turret, just like within the Leopard 1, but the rest will not be penetrable. Notice how the upper hull changed from purple to red, meaning that in this case you will not ricochet, because keep in mind the heat shell ricochets at an angle of 85 degree, and right here we have an angle of 75 degree. However, the APCR shell does, because it ricochets at an angle of 70 degree. So far you could say, well, what does it, I mean, it's not important whether I use one shell or another, because it's basically the same result. Well, let's take another tank. Let's take the Stridsvagn 103, the tier 9 Swedish tank destroyer, and compare to the Leopard 1. As you can see, the armor is shaped so nicely that you will ricochet no matter where you hit this tank. So this tank is super tough to penetrate for the Leopard 1 with its phenomenal penetration value. And even if you select the premium ammunition once again, which is APCR, with its phenomenal 323 millimeters of penetration, you will not be able to penetrate this tank because of the shape of the armor. The armor is only 40 millimeters, but it is shaped so nicely that your shells will ricochet. Let's now take the same tank and compare to the Centurion Action X. Once again, it has APCR as its standard ammunition, so with the standard ammunition you will not be able to pen this tank. However, if you select your heat shell, voila, you can now easily pen this tank. And this has nothing to do with the penetration value, it's purely because of the characteristics of the shell. So in this case, as the ricochet angle of heat shells is 85 degrees instead of 70 degrees, you will be able to penetrate this tank. And so in some situations, having heat as your premium shell will be an advantage. And if you cannot penetrate a tank, but if you have heat available, it might be worth selecting the heat shell, because it will give you another opportunity of maybe penetrating the armor of the tank. Now let's see what happens if we take the Stridsvagn 103 against the tier 10 French heavy tank, the AMX M454. And notice that I selected the standard shell, which only has 250 millimeters of pen, but as the caliber of this tank is 130 millimeters, it exceeds the nominal armor value, which is 40, by more than 3 times. So 40 millimeters times 3 is 120, so every 120 millimeter gun will ricochet on the nicely shaped armor of the Stridsvagn 103B. However, every gun which has a caliber of more than 120, in this case it is once again 130, will not. So there will not be a ricochet even with the AP shell of this tank in those portions here where the armor is 40 millimeters. Now notice how those little bars here have a nominal armor of 60. So if you hit the Stridsvagn 103 in this portion, you will ricochet because the caliber is not sufficient to make use of the 3 caliber rule. In this case, you would need a gun which has more than 180 millimeters of caliber in order to benefit from the 3 caliber rule. So another thing which is super important now, if you are playing a tank like the Stridsvagn 103, you have to think of the caliber of the gun that you are facing with your opponents. You cannot simply rely on your armor, because if your adversary tank has heat shells available, or if the caliber of his gun is more than 3 times higher than the nominal armor of the nominal number of your armor, then they will penetrate your armor. And so this is what you have to keep in mind, and this will basically solve the miracle question why you sometimes get penetrated and sometimes you do not. Let's now take a look at the Centurion 7.1 and compare it once again to the Leopard 1 with its standard ammunition. And we are here at an angle of 77 degrees. So once again, you will bounce on the upper hull of its turret, whereas on the lower portion of the turret, you will not. And basically, same applies with the premium ammunition. So on the upper hull, you will bounce. On the lower hull, you will not. And let's now once again show you the Centurion Action X against the Centurion Action X. And if you load APCR, same applies as before. And with heat shells, you will basically also not penetrate the upper portion of the hull, but this time not due to the angle, but simply because of the effective armor. So this heat shell has a penetration value of 330 millimeters. It ricochets at an angle of 85 degrees, so this is not reached here. As you can see, the angle is 78 degrees approximately, but the effective armor is 548, so you will not be able to penetrate this value. And of course, if you reduce it, then you will be able to penetrate this value. So for example, if the tank only uses 70.7 degrees, you would bounce your regular shell as it would ricochet, but now the armor becomes so weak that your 330 millimeter of penetration will give you a 46, 49, 50% of penetration. So all this is important to notice and to keep in mind, because it will enhance your situational awareness, and you will be able to assess whether you can win an engagement or not. So all in all, you need to know every detail of every tank, every penetration value, and every tank's different shell types? No, and I truly think this is impossible, as there are so many different tanks nowadays in the game. However, this general knowledge allows you to act accordingly in the respective situation. If you get penned by an adversary tank, and if you look at the symbol, i.e. gray standard ammunition, yellow premium ammunition, you can now understand why the adversary tank is able to pen you, and you can make a well thought out decision whether you want to continue the fight or rather fall back. You will simply have a better understanding of what is going on and whether you can win an engagement or not, and you will overall become a better player. Alright, let's now use the remaining game to talk about this game. The Centurion 7.1 is a phenomenal hull down warrior, and as you can see, we already made 6k damage with using the strength of this tank, which is once again playing hull down. And so yeah, we contributed to a win in this situation, and let's now see whether we can get some more damage. We will now try to close the distance towards our tortoise in order to fight against the adversary tortoise, the enemy tortoise, and let's see how it goes. By the way, as I'm not a native speaker, I currently use the word adversary and enemy basically simultaneously as a synonym, but feel free to tell me in the comment section down below what exactly the difference is between those two words, and apologies if I'm not using the language in the, let's say, 100% appropriate way. Alright, so maybe we can get some more damage of the tortoise. Only 191 damage left. But all in all, I think it's a phenomenal game so far. No, unfortunately we cannot. And it showed the strength of this tank. We, by the way, blocked 2100 damage. And now it looks like our team is winning the game by... No, here you go. There's the light tank. And let's now, bam, use another shell. And he will try to evade out of the situation, but we can ram him. And so all in all, we make a phenomenal 6.4k damage in the Centurion 7.1. Alright guys, that was it for today with the video about the penetration mechanics. and the different shell types in World of Tanks. What do you think about this topic? Was there any new info for you in this video, or did you already know everything about this topic? Just leave a comment in the comment section down below. And as always, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. This really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. If you find this video extremely helpful, then feel free to support me via Super Thanks. This way you can make a one-time donation. You just have to click this button underneath the video. If you adore this channel and you want to consistently support me, then consider subscribing to my channel or become a member, once again with the click of a button underneath the video. Thanks a lot, and I see you next time in another World of Tanks video.